Have you ever locked yourself in a bathroom and thrown up your mum's spaghetti whilst knowing you're about to walk out to one opportunity to seize everything you ever wanted? No? Must be just me then. One shot can change your life, or if you're a fighter, it can save your career. You might be down and out like the beginning of Spider-Man 2, but that's no reason to throw the gloves away. These fighters didn't give up on themselves and turned their stories back around with just one win. What's up guys, Bailey here. Just a quick one for you. Ridge are offering 40% off their wallets if you go to ridge.com/MMA on point. Here, Tom, show us your wallet. If you don't want some boring old man wallet, there's over 30 different styles to choose from as well, including titanium and carbon fiber. They were kind enough to send us a few so we could get our hands on them, and I have to say the first thing I noticed is definitely the quality. They're incredibly sleek and you can fit up to 12 cards at once without that annoying wallet bulge. Make sure you get the best offer by using our link ridge.com/MMA on point, and you can save up to 40% through December 22nd.
Is that one yours?
No, well, this one's mine actually.
That one then.
Take that one, I want that one. These are 10 fighters who saved their career with just one performance. Number 10, Diego Sanchez versus Craig White. Well, sadly, as with any MMA legend, it often gets to that point where we start looking at each other sideways after they get finished for the third time and start to question whether or not we want to see them take any more trips to the ER. After everyone's favourite realtor, Ally Quinta, absolutely blasted Diego in April 2017, then in November, Matt Brown damn near chopped his head off, while we were kind of asking those questions about Diego Sanchez. I mean, if you looked up MMA veteran in the dictionary, it would literally just be a picture of Diego Sanchez, and after 12 years, it had seemed like his UFC run was finally going to come to an end. But he was still enough of a legend to headline the UFC Fight Pass prelims at UFC 228, and the UFC gave him Craig White, the Thundercat, a Cage Warriors veteran. Craig was a big welterweight though, and given Diego's track record, well, this could have been his UFC swan song. But he absolutely should not have kissed Diego the Nightmare Sanchez on the nose, and it was the Nightmare that showed up at 228. I mean, from the opening bell, he put Craig on his back with a relentless grappling attack. It looked like the Diego from 10 years ago, and proved he still had the ability to give many guys in the welterweight division problems. He followed that win up with a TKO of Mickey Gall and a performance of the night. Okay, so those aren't the best guys in the division, and obviously he doesn't have a lot of time left before retirement, but the Craig White win for sure turned things around for Diego. Number 9, Jim Miller versus Alex White. When Jim Miller says he wants to be the only man to compete at UFC 100, 200 and 300, I believe him, and he only has about 2 more years before he makes it happen. But if you've been watching the UFC for a while, you'll know he almost didn't make it through 2018. Jim joined the UFC at 12-1 way back in 2008, and after 8 years he won 14 and lost 7, which is pretty good, but he still wasn't in title contention. At UFC 208, on the back of a 3-fight win streak, he got arguably the biggest fight of his career so far against Dustin Poirier, and although it was a fight of the night war, Dustin took a majority decision. From here though, things went downhill for Jim. He lost another decision to a resurging Anthony Pettis, then Francisco Trinaldo, then he was KO'd by Dan Hooker in the first round. That's 4 losses in a row for Jim, who looked like he was going to go the way of many a UFC veteran and quietly make a departure from the UFC. But it turns out he'd been suffering with Lyme disease and had gone untreated for 3 years.
Leading up into 208 when I fought Dustin, that was the hardest couple weeks before a fight that I've ever had.
And things only went downhill from there, and after changing his diet and getting his medication on track, he did manage to figure things out.
I haven't had a relapse since 2017, yeah.
At UFC 228, Jim had one more chance to turn things around and get his career back on track. He was matched up with Alex White. He turned back the clock, submitted him in just 90 seconds, and has had 10 more UFC fights since, and is well on track to fight at UFC 300. Number 8, Anthony Pettis versus Charles Oliveira. You could tell almost immediately from Showtime's WEC career that he had superstar potential. Honestly, people don't give him enough credit for going for those crazy spinning techniques in the face of physical danger and the risk of losing his fight purse. I mean, sure, that stuff is entertaining, but it can backfire so quickly. But at first, it didn't, and his performances and star potential carried him to the top of world extreme cage fighting and then a UFC title. But as quickly as Anthony had risen, his fall almost came just as fast. After defending his UFC belt against longtime Strikeforce lightweight champion Gilbert Melendez, Rafael dos Anjos came along and ripped his new title away from him. He then lost a unanimous decision to Eddie Alvarez, who repeated the same game plan RDA had used, lots of pressure, lots of wrestling. Showtime was then booked in a fan favourite strikers matchup with Edson Barbosa, a fight that would at least stay on the feet and one that he could win. But the Brazilian outclassed Pettis, and that made it 3 losses in a row.
Yeah, I was beating myself up a lot in the last year, about half of my life. I went through some dark times.
Seemingly out of options, he decided to drop down to featherweight, and he co-main evented a fight night against Charles Oliveira. Despite an obviously tough weight cut, Pettis put it together on the night, unloading vintage Showtime combinations and avoiding the majority of Charles's takedowns. Anthony finally found a finish and a guillotine 2 minutes into into the third round. After that, he got a shot at the interim title against Max Holloway, and although pretty much went win-loss for the rest of his UFC run, he stayed in the promotion for another 10 fights. Who knows what would have happened if he lost 4 in a row. Number 7, Uriah Hall versus BEVON Lewis. The collective MMA community jaws dropped when in just episode 3 of the Chael Sonnen John Jones Ultimate Fighter season, Uriah Hall unleashed the KO of the year and immediately became everyone's new favourite UFC prospect. But it was the number 16th seed Kelvin Gastelum who beat Uriah in the finals of the show, and although Primetime was in the UFC, he never managed to put the wins together to become a title challenger. After 2 years, he was just 4-3, but things were looking up after a hellacious spinning back kick victory over Gegard Mousasi. That's when he took a step up in competition and fell short against Robert Whittaker, Derek Brunson, and then Gegard in the rematch. He bounced back against Krzysztof Jotko with a second round TKO, but was then fed to Paulo Costa, and in the last 3 years, he'd only won 1 of his 5 fights. Unbelievably, it looked like Uriah was on the precipice of his UFC career, and at 232, he was given another undefeated middleweight in BEVON Lewis on the Fight Pass prelims. Although he was in the fight for the first 2 rounds, BEVON was outworking and outlanding Uriah, and as the third round started, it looked like he was about to go 1 for 6. But just 90 seconds into the third round, Primetime let it go with a perfectly timed one-hitter quitter of a right hand and shut out the lights on BEVON. Personally, I jumped out of my chair. I couldn't help but feel happy for Uriah, who basically just saved his UFC career. After that, he won another 3 fights in a row. He's retired now, but that Lewis win gave him the momentum to end his career strong. Number 6, Andrei Arlovski versus Junior Albini. Old Andrei Arlovski, eh? That pitbull who every time you count him out always finds a new way to surprise you. Honestly, most people thought he was done after Sergey Kharitonov KO'd him in Strikeforce back in 2011. It put a stamp on a 4-fight losing streak, 3 of them by vicious KO, but he only lost 1 of his next 8 fights as he competed across the globe until the UFC came back to him with an offer to rejoin the promotion 6 years after he left. I mean, technically he saved his career on more than 1 occasion, but the opinion was from some MMA media that he was no longer UFC caliber, but he went on a 4-fight win streak before eventually being stopped by Stipe Miocic. That unfortunately started a landslide of a losing streak for Andre, as he was TKO'd by Overeem, subbed by Josh Barnett, had his clock cleaned by Ngannou, then lost a unanimous decision to Tybura. That was 5 losses in a row, a complete 180 on the 4-fight winning streak he had on arrival. It was literally make or break for Andre when he fought the new UFC arrival Junior Albini, who was pretty hyped. He was 14-2 on a 9-fight win streak and had been the Aspira FC champion. But you can never count out the pitbull, man. Andre just made things awkward and difficult for Albini, and after 15 minutes he'd stayed conscious and let everyone know he wasn't done yet and took the unanimous decision. That was back in 2017, and unbelievably he's had another 15 UFC fights since then and is still finding ways to beat these up-and-coming heavyweights. Number 5, Jan Blachowicz versus Devin Clark. Before the time of his UFC signing, Jan Blachowicz had established himself as one of the top prospects coming out of Europe. He was 17-3, the defending KSW light heavyweight champion, and had that legendary Polish power. It was even on display in his UFC debut, where it took him just 2 minutes to stop the Swedish sledgehammer Ilir Latifi. But after that, things went downhill for Europe's next top fighter. He suffered a pair of losses to Jimmy Manuwa and Corey Anderson, managed to bounce back with a decision win, but then found himself on the losing end of 2 more decisions to Alexander Gustafsson and Patrick Cummings. Considering he was a new signing and only had 1 out of his last 5 fights, the UFC probably had the walking papers all ready to go. He even got written off by a lot of the fan base as just another European guy unable to compete at the global level. But he got 1 more chance to perform in his home country of Poland. The UFC gave him the 8-1 Devin Clark, who had been scouted on Dana White's looking for a fight. But none of that mattered to Jan. In the second round, Devin shot a sloppy takedown and Jan wasted no time grabbing his neck and choking him out. He won performance of the night and didn't get handed his walking papers. In fact, he only lost 1 more fight out of the next 8 before claiming the 205 title and of course handing Israel Adesanya his first loss in MMA. An unlikely story from a champion that almost never was. Number 4, Tai Tuivasa versus Stefan Struve. What's not fun about Tai Tuivasa, eh? I mean, if you're the UFC, why wouldn't you sign an undefeated Australian heavyweight with 6 first-round finishes, half of them in less than a minute? That's only a recipe for entertainment, and at least at first it damn well was. Tai started his UFC run with 3 wins, the last of which was a decision over Andrei Arlovski, which had pretty much become the litmus test of whether or not you're going to make it as a UFC heavyweight. Then he took a step up in competition though, and hit a UFC glove-shaped wall. Junior Dos Santos stopped him in the second round, Blagoy Ivanov gritted out a decision, and Sergey Spivak took him down and just pummeled him really. Although Tai had proven a great KO artist, it just seemed he wasn't really ready for this level of competition. But he got 1 more chance against Stefan Struve to rewrite his UFC story. He managed to stop the tall Dutchman with just 1 second left in the first round, and he wanted to do a shoey, but the Nelk boys dropped the ball and forgot to bring the beer. Won't make that mistake again. Tai had reinvigorated his career and went into 2021 on a high note where he rode that momentum and knocked out all 3 of his opponents. The next year we saw him in high-profile fights against Derek Lewis and then Cyril Gane, and to think we almost lost him forever. Number 3, Paul Craig versus Magomed Ankalaev. We've had Paul Craig on twice to watch some fights on the MMA On Point sofa, and he also told us about his journey into MMA, where he started competing in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu before his coach told him about MMA and reckoned he should give it a go. Flash forward 2 years after his debut, and he was 8-0, all of them by finishes, only one made it to round 2, and he'd managed to win the BAMMA Light Heavyweight Championship. Sounds like a perfect European signing for the UFC, and they snapped him up on a 4-fight deal. He made good on the debut and armbarred Henrique da Silva in the second round, also picking up an extra $50K for a performance of the night bonus. Not bad, not bad. But next he was given Tyson Pedro, who blasted him with elbows in the first round. Then Khalil Roundtree introduced him to high-level striking and KO'd him in his home country. With just 1 fight left on his contract, Paul desperately needed a win and said so himself, knowing that a loss would probably even mean his retirement from the sport entirely. No big deal, he just needed to beat Magomed Ankalaev, an undefeated Russian who was also making his UFC debut. And things did not go well for Paul in this one. Magomed showed how elite he was, controlling the fight basically wherever it went. But the 10-second clapper sounded, and knowing he was 10 seconds away from getting fired, Paul threw up a Hail Mary triangle choke, and he got it. Magomed tapped, and with 1 second left on the clock, Craig had literally saved his career. He's had another 10 UFC fights since then, collected a total of 7 Performance of the Night bonuses with his own blend of light heavyweight jiu-jitsu. Number 2, Tito Ortiz versus Ryan Bader. After Frank Shamrock quit the UFC in 1999, Tito took the throne as the light heavyweight champion, and he defended about 5 times before losing back-to-back to Randy Couture and Chuck Liddell. But he kept fighting and kept winning, going on another 5-fight win streak. He was even given a chance to win back his belt in a rematch with Chuck. But once again, Chuck finished him, and unfortunately for the Huntington Beach bad boy, it was all downhill from here. A fence grab in his next fight saw him draw with Rashad Evans, and although he came close on a triangle, he then lost a decision to Lyoto Machida. Forrest Griffin took a split decision off him, and the following year he dropped another loss to Matt Hamill. The idea of a former dominant champion slowly falling by the wayside wasn't something that happened a lot at this point, and seeing as how Tito had now gone 5 years without a win in the octagon, he was ripped apart by the fan base, who were basically just asking him to retire. Even Dana said post-fight at 121, "We all know what happens when a guy loses 4 fights in a row. Disneyland?" And look, they didn't do him any favors. Next up they gave him Ryan Bader, who had been undefeated and just lost to John Jones in a title eliminator. Oh, I know, we'll give him the guy who's not won in 5 years. But Tito surprised absolutely everybody when he subbed him in just 2 minutes with a guillotine. Can't get rid of him that easy. Ortiz extended his UFC tenure for another few years, and honestly, that win kept him alive in the sport for quite a while. And number 1, Mark Hunt versus Chris Tuchscher. The K1 World Grand Prix was at one point the pinnacle of kickboxing, and in 2001 Mark Hunt was crowned the champion. He then turned his attention to the fastest growing sport at the time, power slapping. No, I mean MMA. He was brought into Pride to fight Hideyoko Yoshida, who armbarred him in the first round. Mark actually bounced back incredibly well though. He won 5 fights in a row, including beating Vanderlei Silva and Mirko Krokop, but then pretty much everything just sort of fell apart really. He lost to Josh Barnett by Kimura, then Fedor again by Kimura, so he went to Dream instead, but again lost in just 1 minute, this time to a key lock from Alistair Overeem. Stupid bloody MMA fighters and their fancy submissions. Mark was a kickboxer, goddammit. He actually got a striker next in Melvin Manhoof, who did stand with him, but he also knocked him out in just 18 seconds. Then things went from bad to fucking dreadful when Gegard Mousasi subbed him, this time in just 90 seconds. Fuck mate, if you're a Mark Hunt fan, times were tough. The UFC bought Pride and Mark's contract was one of the few that was legit, but at 5 and 6, they didn't even want him. They offered to buy him out of his contract, but Mark said no. He wanted to fight. Could there be any more pressure on a UFC debut though? He was matched up against Sean McCorkle, and fuck me, he got armbarred in just 1 minute again. But he got one more chance, one opportunity to seize everything he ever wanted. He fought Chris TUCHSCHERER, but he KO'd him in a knockout of the night performance. He won 3 more in a row after that, saved his MMA career, and ended up staying with the promotion for 8 more years. That's how you turn a fucking career around. Big thanks to Maximus Editus Vidius, or his real name, Max Randall, for editing this video together. He's a solid bloke, isn't he? And you can find him at Max Randall on social media. Big up to the creator of the On Point intro theme as well, Mr. Ben Rosette. He's currently crowdfunding to fly a hot air balloon around the world. You can support him by listening to his music on Spotify at Ben Rosette. Were there any champions that you knew just wouldn't hold on to their belts for long? Well, comment below and let us know. Chuck us a thumbs up if you liked the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you want more. I've been Bailey, and see you in the next one.